Hello everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon for our session on systems stewardship, which is quite difficult to say. We're doing this, so Social Enterprise Scotland's doing this in partnership with the TSI network and the Third Sector Employability Forum. So I guess just to say, I'm Jane, I'm the membership manager here at Social Enterprise Scotland, and I also sit on the exec group at TSEF. And I guess it's just really, this is one in a series of sessions that we've run around employability. There are more to come, and sessions that we've held previously you can see on our YouTube channel, and we'll post that in the chat as we go. I think that's really all I want to say. I'm going to hand over to you, Pegs, for the session. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be really interesting.
That's great, thank you. So hi everybody, for those that I haven't met before, my name's Pegs Bailey. I'm the National Third Sector Employability Partnership Engagement Manager for Scotland, and my role is to work closely with colleagues across the whole employability ecosystem, if you like, to try and grow that wonderful mixed economy provision that we all know is going to make the difference to the people that we support. So I'm going to have to, I think, hopefully, Dawn, I'm going to have to ask you to nudge my slides along so we're not swapping and changing. So I'm just going to say a little bit about why we've asked Dawn to come along and talk about system stewardship and why we think it matters. And then I'm going to hand over to Dawn Plimmer from Collaborate Kick, who has lots and lots of experience and knowledge around different ways of approaching this thing called system stewardship in other parts of the UK and in other policy contexts. So in terms of no one left behind, I suppose, hopefully most people who are working in employability are very familiar with these principles and the values that sit behind it. But particularly there is the value around continuous improvement and taking a kind of a dignity and respect approach to what we're doing and how we're delivering our services. But also this line down at the bottom about things being driven by evidence, including data and the experience of users. And when I was working in Fife, we did quite a significant piece of work, engaging with people who were using services as well as those who were delivering them, to try and understand what their experience of employability was and why, and how that might guide kind of what we were doing and how we were funding services. And apologies if I'm looking to the left, because that's where my notes are. And what we found was that really, when we look at employability, it is actually a really complex issue. It's a complex problem. So we tend to treat it, or have in the past treated it and funded it, as though it's quite a linear issue. You know, if we input interview skills and CV skills and a bit of work experience, then, you know, somebody is employable and off they'll go and they'll get a job, and that is the box ticked. But what we found was that, yes, whilst those things mattered, there were a whole host of other things that were going on that were completely out with the realm of the employability services, which might impact somebody's ability to work. And they included things like the availability of local jobs, public transport to and from local jobs, childcare, healthcare services, and even things like stigma and discrimination in the workplace, which might mean somebody who's highly employable still would be unable to get work. There are 1,001 things once you start looking at it that will impact on whether or not somebody is able to move into a job at a particular point in time. Which means that, next slide, please. Oh, you've missed one. Can we go back? That's odd. Yes, that one.
Sorry, Bex.
It's okay. You'll get your driving skills license. Yeah, so this means that getting a job actually tends to look a lot more like the squiggles outside the room than the lovely kind of 5-stage pipeline that we have tended to sort of build our policy around. And that then leads us to thinking about how we plan, commission and deliver services very differently. We need to move away from a pipeline to something which is a little bit more like an ecosystem, move away from addressing the complexity without adding to it. So next slide. So some responses to that is to just get rid of everything and make it very, very simple. We've just got one service, one provision, and that's great and very easy to manage and navigate, but it's not really supporting a great diversity of experience, issues, challenges, opportunities, and so on. Next click, I think. The next way we tend to deal with it is maybe by putting in place some options, but we keep them all very linear. So this you can have at stage 1 and stage 2, and this at stage 5, and this at stage 3, and this if you live in this area, and so on. But they're all kind of quite separate. And then the last click So this is my way of trying to think about what actually, I think it might be one more click, but what an integrated employability ecosystem might look like. Something which is quite vibrant with lots of diversity of options, clear pathways through it, and the ability to kind of navigate that at your own pace and leisure, depending on your need and your personal life experiences. We can't get rid of complexity and we can't get too rigid about how people access services. So we need to think about how we grow, look after and manage this kind of ecosystem of services, and that requires quite a different approach to funding and commissioning and management of the entire whole rather than little bits of the picture. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dawn, who's going to explain this much more clearly than the garden analogy, hopefully, and how system stewardship might have a part to play in helping us think differently about how we create more of an ecosystem experience than a lots of different services experience. So Dawn, over to you.
Thanks so much, Pegs, and great to be here today. So today I'm going to be talking about system stewardship. I'm not at all an expert on employability, so I'm really hoping there'll be some engagement, some questions, some thoughts from you in trying to apply this to your particular context, because you are the experts in employability. I work at Collaborate CIC, and I guess as our name suggests, all of our work is about collaboration, particularly place-based collaboration and collaboration that's focused on trying to shift systems. It's not just about delivering services, but how do we make that ecosystem that Pegs was talking about work better? How do we shift some of the underlying conditions to make systems work better for everyone? So we work in lots of different policy areas, lots of different places across the UK. But I guess one of the pieces of work I've been particularly working on and I'm really interested in is the question of kind of how do we work better in complexity? As Peg said, often our approaches are based on control, trying to treat things as linear. But when we're talking about people's lives, social issues, that they are complex. So you can see some human learning systems diagrams on the right-hand side. I've been working with an academic called Dr. Toby Lowe and a big group of partners across the UK to really explore what does it look like to work better in complexity. And in doing that work, what I found really interesting is the people who just know how to do this really, really well. And over time, we've come to call those people system stewards, people who can really navigate complex systems, help people work better together in complex systems. So I've had the privilege of talking to lots of them over the last 5 years or so. So today, just wanted to share a few insights about what this role looks like and ultimately like what are the capabilities we need to work well in complexity, and then explore with all of you. So what might that mean for employability? So the key things we'll cover today is firstly, what is stewardship? What does it take? What does it require of a steward? And then exploring together what's the potential of a stewardship approach in employability. I'll be giving some input, but particularly at the end of each section, would really welcome your engagement, experiences, examples, thoughts, and throughout, feel free to pop your hand up or post something in the chat. I might not be able to see everything in the chat immediately, just because it's really hard to share screen at the same time, but I'll make sure I come to any comments as they pop up. And Pegs, maybe if you flag anything major as we go. So I hope that sounds all right to everyone. And before we kick off, I'd love to hear a little bit from you. Like, what interests you about stewardship? Why did you come along today? So if you want to take 2 or 3 minutes just to pop that in the chat, then it'll give me a sense of what you'd all like to hear about today.
Just going to say as well, if people are challenged with managing chat and online, I think you can also show your hand if that's helpful, you know. Okay, so I've got someone saying about how it connects with human learning systems and how it works in practice. So yeah, that's definitely something that come up, know very little, but has found the series insightful. So here she is. Just understanding how to explore and advance collaboration, opportunities for better joint planning, Sorry, I'm just reading these out. I hope this is useful, Dawn.
Yeah, sorry, I've got them now.
Got that coming up. Okay, I'll let you take over then.
Yeah, lots of interesting collaboration. Great to see some people don't know anything about stewardship. You're in the perfect place. And Pegs, yeah, you're one about funding management. My background's in the voluntary sector in funding, and yeah, my frustration with how it worked is what led me to explore this area more. Yeah, very practical reasons supporting young people better. What it is in practice. Our collective leadership approaches, yeah, very, very similar. Basically, stewardship is a form of collective collaborative leadership. Great, thanks so much, everyone. That's really helpful for me to get a sense of who's in the room, what you're all interested in. Hopefully, we'll get to much of that today. So I don't want to make today too theoretical, but I think it's a bit hard to talk about system stewardship without thinking about what is actually a system. It's a word that's thrown around lots, but it's often helpful to define it. So a definition I quite like from Donella Meadows, a key systems thinker, is a system is a set of things interconnected in a way that means they produce their own pattern of behaviour over time. So here the key thing is it's a set of things, there's multiple, they're interconnected and they create a pattern of behaviour. So like if you say take a fruit bowl, you've got a collection of different fruits, but they don't connect in a way that creates their pattern of behaviour, it's static. Whereas if you take a car, for example, all the different parts of a car connect together in a way that creates movement, or a school, the students, the teachers, parents, support staff all interact together in a way that creates a pattern of behaviour and ritual and rhythms. If you think about natural ecology, there's lots of, like a forest, that is a system that interconnected creates a pattern of behaviour. So a system is basically like a live, living, interconnected thing, a collection of different things. And what I specifically like us to think about is complex systems. So a car, it's a system, but it's complicated. There's lots of different cogs and wheels, but it's kind of knowable. Whereas if you think about employability, there are so many different actors and factors that are connecting. It's about people's lives. It's not knowable to some extent. We know what good practice looks like, but we can never fully know what is going to happen, what is going to help an individual, how the external context might change, how things might impact them personally. So it's really helpful to think not just about a system, but what specifically is a complex system, where there's knowledge isn't enough, really. David Snowden has this Cynefin framework, which maybe I should have used to explain this better, but he distinguishes between simple problems, like baking a cake, making a cup of tea, complicated things that require technical expertise, like sending a rocket to the moon, fixing a car, and complex problems, which are social issues that are really intertwined, interconnected, ever evolving. So yeah, as I said, like the forest. Another systems thinker, Nora Bateson, talks about the fact that a falling leaf is not just that and nothing more. A falling leaf is the product of the forest that it's in, the sunlight, the wind, the soil acidity, the animals, all the other plants around them, and all of those different interactions. Or perhaps something a bit closer to employability, this lists many of the things Peg's mentioned. If you're thinking about just some of the actors and factors that impact an individual's well-being, just some of them here, but these are constantly interacting in different ways at different times and for different people. It's complex, there's loads going on, and to some extent it's unpredictable, it's emergent. So this is where stewards really play a role in complex systems. So I talked a little bit about human learning systems, and by talking to lots of funders, commissioners, public services, charities, we've seen very kind of common and distinct ways of working well in complexity across all those different types of organisation, working on different themes in different places. And while this might sound obvious, doing this really purposefully and intentionally is really, really hard and really counterintuitive to how systems currently operate. So firstly, being human, we need to value relationships, people's strengths, and enable decision-making much closer to communities. The people who are best placed to make decisions in complexity are the people experiencing it day to day. So instead of a commissioner over here making a decision, we need to enable communities who know what's going on day to day to have more say. Secondly, learning. As I said, systems are constantly adapting, evolving, impacting people differently at different times. So there's no point producing static plans. We need to continually learn and adapt. As a funder, one of the things that I found incredibly frustrating was when we kind of said, right, put your outcomes, your activities, your outputs in an application. 3 years on, success is sticking to that plan. Whereas actually success was moving away from that plan based on what you're learning, based on how the context has changed. And then finally, recognising that systems are connected and interdependent. Single organisations, single services cannot create the outcome of employability, as Peg's referenced. We need to work together to understand those different actors and factors and how we make the best of all of our strengths to try and improve the employability ecosystem, the support for individuals. So, having said all of that, what is system stewardship? So system stewardship is about nurturing healthier systems. It's about developing the conditions that enable better outcomes. So there's a really important role for service delivery in improving employability. But unless we think about some of the underlying conditions, we're probably never going to impact positively on people's employability. It might be about to what extent there's a shared understanding of what employability is and what success looks like. It might be about the fact that, how much do people's aspirations for employment, how much are they supported by the system? How joined up are people versus how competitive are they? To what extent is resource put in the right places? There's so many questions which need to be resolved beyond just focusing on service delivery. So stewards bring together actors, firstly, to help see themselves as a system. That's a really important part of this. Do we even see ourselves as part of an interconnected system? They build trusting relationships, they help share power across different people in the system and help people learn and adapt together. And this is all about ultimately improving outcomes and doing that using relationships, insights, resources better to achieve shared goals. So rather than us all working separately in silos, how do we bring all that insight, resource, motivation, relationships together to achieve more together? So I've used the word healthy systems, but it's quite hard to sometimes visualize what a healthy system is. I think often it's easier to think about what an unhealthy system is because we probably experience it all the time, and I imagine it's something you experience a lot in employability. So if an unhealthy system is siloed, we're all working separately, sometimes undermining each other's work. It's often competitive, we're pitted against each other to bid for money. There are power imbalances. Where is the voice of someone accessing employability support in all of this? That's something we often experience, whatever system it is. So if we flip that on its head, what's the opposite of all of these things? What does a healthy system for employability look like? So I'd really welcome in the chat or pop your hand up any thoughts on what does a healthy system look like for you, particularly kind of thinking about employability. Yep, open, honest conversations, definitely. Honesty, sharing of information, learning together. Yeah, equity of status, sharing power, all having a say. Definitely flexibility and adaptation, partnership working, yeah. Knowledge of what's happening, yeah. If we're all working separately, we don't know what we're all doing, we're not sharing information about individuals we're supporting in common, we can't do our best. Trust and dialogue, definitely. Really links to the honesty point. Individual at the heart of decisions, absolutely. That's central to all of this. Person-centred. Yep, this is the best list I've ever seen in response to this question, so thank you.
Hi Dawn, it's Vicky from Five Council here.
Yeah.
I work for the Opportunities 5 partnership, and we have principles that cover all these things, and we have the heart of the client at the delivery of commissioning all the way through. So much so the lived experience panel were are marking the commissioning as well. Within that, so they are, all our communication goes through the lived experience, just so then we're getting the right language out to the client as well. So yeah, we do a really healthy system, but we are always looking to improve as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and I guess that appetite to do things differently, to learn, to adapt is so key, being able to have those.
I think it is hard with the funding restraints from Scottish Government and UK Government, and with them looking at the targets. I was at a meeting the other week around the community justice, and they were looking at the figures that we had given for people with a criminal record, and it's like, but that's not relevant for what you need it for. You have to sense check these datas and things like that, so it's making the government realise that by stats it's not always telling the true story of what's going on there as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I think what counts as knowledge, what counts as evidence in this is so important, and part of human learning systems is all about how do we go away from this illusion of control to recognizing that data is gamed. If you set targets and manage providers in a controlling way, they're going to game the system. What we actually need to do is still use data, but use that for learning, and acknowledge that if we performance manage people things they can't honestly control, it is just going to create gaming and an unhealthy context and system. Alicia, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that well. Elsa, tell me how to pronounce it.
No, sorry, thanks. I was just going to say, within that as well, it's about taking on board when partners that are closer to delivery and that are working directly with people that have got lived experience, feedback, suggestions about the inappropriateness of some of the data, then there being an ability to take on board and understand that, instead of saying, well, that's the way it is and that's the way it has to be.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, so much of this work is about how do we blur that boundary between providers and commissioners, and this is a partnership endeavour. How do we put all our resources and insight together rather than having that power imbalance, which makes honesty really, really hard. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to copy that list out of the chat, because I thought that was a brilliant list of features of a healthy system, and clearly really applies to employability. So there's no right answer, but these are some system behaviours from Lancaster Chase. They're quite a few years old now, but I find these personally quite helpful to give some examples of what a healthy system could look like, and I think many of these we just touched on. I'll just leave them up for a moment in case you wanted to have a look. But yeah, open, trusting relationship, shared power, that really came out in the points you made, continuous learning. So I've said system stewardship is about purposefully trying to nurture a healthier system. Most of the systems we operate in aren't healthy, so it takes really intentional, purposeful work to try and shift the system rather than just default to normal ways of working. And the activity that system stewards do, linked to loads of things that you've just popped in the chat. So they foster trusting relationships. They bring people together to create understanding and empathy so we can work together. And so much of this is about understanding each other's motivations, constraints, needs. Like often we do care about the same things in common, but a commissioner over here is working under loads of constraints as well. But equally, if providers don't have the chance to share what constraints they're operating under, how that's impacting support for people, we're never going to be able to improve support. So how do we foster those trusting relationships as a basis for working together honestly and productively? Secondly, bringing people together around a common purpose. So trying to actually see the system, know that we all operate in a system, we're all interlinked, we're all working towards the same thing. So actually acknowledge that we are part of an interconnected system, and begin to explore what are our roles within that system. How are they interconnected? How does our behaviour impact each other? And where are our strengths? How can we each play to our strengths rather than competing against each other or duplicating work? It's about thinking about what's our common purpose and how do we best work towards that. But I think it's also important to say it's absolutely not that we're all going to agree on everything. Healthy collaboration does involve different disagreement. It does involve different points of view. But it's being able to, you know, still be in the room together, surface those different points of view, but still find a way to ultimately work towards those shared goals. Or even like say, actually, we don't know the answer to this, or we've got slightly different views on this. Let's figure a way to test them out, find different ways of doing things. So thirdly, deep listening. As people have said, really putting people accessing employability support, experiencing employability at the heart of how we work. How do we really deeply listen to the people we support and put their voice at the heart of how the system of support operates? How do we kind of use that insight and feed that up to influence the rest of the system rather than things being top down and not related to people's lives and unique circumstances and aspirations? Enabling learning, so creating a learning culture that enables that ongoing adaptation and change. Or the policy environment might have shifted in the last 3 months. How do we come together and figure out what our new approach is? Changes in the national minimum wage might have impacted the employability landscape. The closure of a local employer might have impacted, or even the appearance of new local employers. So how do we respond to those contextual factors, but also how do we respond to the learning we're getting through our work day to day? And how do commissioners, public services, charities come together to share that learning with a voice of people accessing employability support right at that heart? What's working, what's not? How do we need to improve together? And data is really important there, but it's about using that data for learning rather than trying to control people. And then finally, rebalancing power. So addressing power imbalances to increase the voice and agency of those who are least heard. That might be providers, but ultimately also people accessing employability support. How do we ensure their voice is right at the heart? So this is the hard work of systems stewardship. Often it's invisible, often it's not in anyone's job title, often it's not funded. But this is the stuff, the underlying conditions that helps us work better together to support the people we're there to support. So this is the activity that we can see time and again makes loads of difference. So just a few quotes from people who do act as system stewards. So Julian, who's at what was a CVS in like basically a charity infrastructure organisation in Hartlepool. He talks about how they work to surface awareness of there being a system and the importance of people understanding their role in relation to others. Gary Wallace, a commissioner in public health in Plymouth, talks about, we actually, as commissioners, started to listen to what people were telling us and think about how to respond in a collective way as a system. We weren't trying to work in a linear way. We were listening to lived experience, understanding all the things that create value for people. And ultimately, this was a much more sensible human way of working when we really listened and put that at the heart of our work. And in Plymouth, I've really used appreciative inquiry really deeply to guide this work. And Sally, Chief Exec of the Barnwood Trust in Gloucestershire, talks about stewardship being at the nexus between intentionality and intuition. It's about being really intentional and purposeful, but sometimes you just need to go with your gut. Sometimes there's not a right answer. You need to kind of navigate the opportunities, the challenges that come up and try and support people to move in a positive direction. So it's constantly about sensing what could this mean, helping people ask the questions to move on collectively. So just to throw in a few examples from different contexts. So Liverpool Combined Authority ran an assertive outreach programme for homeless people. It was across 6 different local authority areas, so hugely different contexts, hugely different partners, hugely different needs in terms of people experiencing homelessness. But they just knew the existing way of supporting homeless people was not working. So they explicitly took on a system stewardship role as a whole local authority, as a whole combined authority, but also they changed their contract review and monitoring officer role into a stewardship role. So this all became about, as a steward, bringing people together, fostering trusting and honest relationships between everyone involved, particularly trying to build trust between providers and commissioners, and actually among providers themselves, trying to stop that competition and promote shared learning. It was all about being led by learning rather than predefined outcomes. Obviously there are outcomes that they want the service to work towards, but rather than holding people to rigid KPIs and targets, it was about how do we surface learning, and how as commissioner can commissioner be there as a problem solver, not trying to control what providers are doing. They work to increase understanding of human learning systems, what it actually takes to work in complexity, and really focus on improving that commissioner-provider relationship. Providers still had to produce monitoring reports, but Alex, the system steward, said, like if I go on an outreach walk at 5 a.m. in the morning, that is so much more valuable to me than a monitoring report 6 months later with a load of out-of-date figures in it. Like, if I am there with providers, seeing the issues they experience day to day, firstly, I understand their work better and I can ask helpful questions, but also I can be well placed to connect them to other providers around shared challenges and think about, as commissioner, how can we help solve problems together? And they also try to create space for reflection and learning. So they had to do the contract monitoring, but they held lots of shared learning sessions. They had a joint learning framework. They come together regularly as providers and commissioners to learn together and think about what's working, what's not, what do we need to do differently. And there's a quote from Alex, who acted as a steward, about the importance of staying human, not being a rigid commissioner, or not seeing a really rigid divide between commissioner and provider. We need to focus on being human, having encouraging conversations, have a cup of tea and a chat, and allow people to honestly share what they're frustrated with and go at it in a human way. So I think this really sums up what being a steward is all about. And Katie, her boss, who kind of led this whole approach, talks about how they play a key role in bringing people together, enabling, facilitating conversations. We try and identify how to face challenges and overcome blockages. So it's a real enabling role, really reimagining that commissioner role, trying to create a healthier system through fostering relationships, honesty, learning, and joint problem solving. To give example of a charity, so Surrey Youth Focus is an infrastructure organisation in Surrey, in England, and they work to improve outcomes for children and young people across Surrey, particularly supporting the third sector to work more effectively together and influence the public sector as well. So they view their role as bringing the right people together to create meaningful change for young people. And these are some of the activities that they do to enable that. And they do some really simple things like coffee and chat mornings, where people come together and discuss issues like, I don't know, school non-attendance, or they do induction sessions for any new person in the system, whether you're working for the council or a small charity. If you're new to the children and young people system in Surrey, they hold joint inductions, so you get to know each other, the system, and really see your role as part of the interconnected system right from day one. And this is from Kate, the chief exec, saying a little bit about what stewardship means for them. So they do convening around different topics based on issues they see coming up. Sometimes they're asked to do it, sometimes they see an issue and run with it. But it's about starting with a blank piece of paper, getting everyone in the room and really creating that shared ownership by doing things together. So again, they're a real enabling role, bringing people together, focusing on what's not working and what could look different. And then a final example at Gloucestershire, Healthier Communities Together, is a stewardship group made up of people from across the third sector and public sector in Gloucestershire. And basically their goal is to enable fairer health across the county. So they really invest in coming together as leaders across the system, building relationships and trust as a foundation for enabling fairer health. So they're all about trying to understand and create better conditions for fairer health. So they say, we believe how we work is important to focus on because initiatives and projects run their course, but connection and trust endure. This forms a foundation for deeper and more radical change. So they've really tried to be disciplined about, let's not run loads of projects, let's not do loads of initiatives, let's understand, let's model different ways of working, and let's invite other people into those different ways of working and being and tackling problems. And yeah, they're starting to see some really interesting results, both in their own behaviour within their own organisations, but also across the rest of the system as well. So I've talked a lot so far, so I'd love to hand over to you now. Some people have already shared some examples, but I'd love to hear, where have you seen stewardship in action? It might be your work, it might be someone else's work, but yeah, I'd love to hear any examples from you.
Who's feeling brave? I was going to say, Vicky definitely in 5 took on a real system stewardship role with the moving towards kind of managing the funded projects in a way where it was more about how are things working together rather than just, yes, looking at, you know, numbers and delivery, because that's an important part of employability, but looking to understand where things are working and why they're not working, rather than kind of a very linear computer says no type thing. So I'm saying that on behalf of Vicky, but I also see that's given a chance for Elsa to raise her hand, so maybe I'll let Elsa come in as well.
No, let Vicky go first if she wants, that's fine.
Can I just add to that? I think we're really lucky in 5 that we have got 5 voluntary action that make a big before it was Pegs and now latter it's Dorothy that takes on this as well, and they get the training providers together regularly to talk about good practice and just to meet. Networking seems to be a big thing that we advocate in Fife with Know Your Network, listening to each other, what's working with one training provider, and they have good relationships within Fife. They will pick the phone up, they will speak to each other and share good practices. We also encourage partnership working. I think longer the days of European funding that an outcome stuck with that client, that training provider, we've moved away from that and saying that first barrier removal is just as much as important as that last barrier to get them into work. And that's where constantly going on about this to the training providers, that working together is a healthier approach for the client going forward.
Oh, thanks so much, Vicky. And have you seen kind of noticeable changes in better support and outcomes for the people you're supporting?
100%. I think it also makes it healthier for the training providers as well themselves, that they're not as a dog eat dog world that against each other. They are working better up together. They are collaborating a lot better with each other as well. We're getting better outcomes over the board with that. So yeah, I think it's really a positive outlook in Fife. But as I said, we're always looking to improve and do things better.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. And yeah, I think the motivation of staff, employability workers, working through this approach is so much more satisfying. It's so much more why we went into this kind of work. And yeah, good luck with the community of practice, Dorothy. That sounds really interesting.
I think it's really important. I think especially like for complex, one of our training providers, Fife Gingerbread, does do that holistic approach. It's not just about getting that person into work, it's about the house and it's about everything. So basically you need to have that all work together to help that client. And just because when they go into work doesn't mean that that's the end of their problems. Some of the times it's just the beginning of the areas that cat needs work with as well. So in-work support is just as much as important to that, getting them into the job.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Vicky. Elsa, did you want to come in, and then I'll go to Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just going to say, like, the way our partnership in Argyll has evolved, started from engagement by local organisations with participants on what worked well for them and what some of the real challenges were in terms of engaging with support services, you know, being passed from pillar to post and all of that stuff that goes on. And then I think we are quite lucky in some areas, I think particularly in rural areas, that a lot of folk know each other, like, you know each other personally as well as professionally. So those relationships are quite solid. You're able to have kind of honest conversations. There is an element of trust. It doesn't matter if somebody's from one of the big public sector agencies, because your Wayne might have gone to the same school as them, so you've met in the playground. So some of these things definitely help, I think, to build those trusting relationships, to have those honest conversations. And also it's about practice as well, right? So listening to hear rather than listening to say what you want to say next. And so bringing some of that practice to the table as well, I think has been really helpful to help shape a partnership as part of the local employability partnership, where the third sector is as much respected and listened to as any other partner around the table. Yeah, we don't hold the resources, but we're trusted to contribute our ideas and help identify what the needs are to then shape where resources go. And then similarly, being able to use those approaches back in communities. So as we involve organisations that are maybe much smaller and maybe have less capacity in terms of having some of those strategic discussions, but they're very well connected and trusted in their locality, which might be remote and rural. So, you know, a young person may have gone to youth club there, or a parent may have known that organisation for many years. So it's about kind of making those connections both in terms of roots, but also branch and tree as well. So you've got that kind of whole dynamic interconnection of where needs are and where resources are, and there is a real level of listening and being responsive as things change, which they often do. And if I'm honest about it, being able to deal with some of the turbulence and challenges of where the resources come from more centrally. So, you know, annualised funding with huge breaks in between. You know, it's not like people stop being vulnerable at the end of March, for example. So having that level of resilience built in, that there is trusted relationships to work through some of those difficult times as well.
Thanks, Elsa. There was so much in there. And I think, yeah, Dorothy's put in the chat as well the importance of involving national level partners as well, because they influence the health of the system, the way funding works, the way targets are set. So yeah, about bringing everyone together where possible, and also joining force to amplify the message. Like, if we're all saying the same thing, hopefully that will break through. And like, ultimately, like, most people aren't badly intentioned. It's just the traditional ways of working are so ingrained. We do drive some of these things that do make it an unhealthy system. Yeah, what you said about relationships just feels so important. And Kate at Surrey Youth Focus, she's always talking about, you know, people are always asking her to create a directory, but she's like, well, that's not a substitute for trusting relationships. As Surrey Youth Focus, we're going to bring people together, get them in a room, have a cup of tea together. You know, as a static directory, firstly, it goes out of date all the time, but it does not substitute for those relationships, that trust, the ability to pick up the phone and know that you've got some shared foundations. Elizabeth, did you want to share an example?
Hi, it's actually Louise, but for some reason my computer, since I took over, has not allowed me to log in as myself. It keeps defaulting to a full member of staff. Nevertheless, so we are a third sector organisation, CIC, but we also have a commercial arm in that we make artisan chocolates. We work with women who have lived experience of the justice system, and I think, you know, as a new CEO within the organisation, the real sort of priority focus areas for me around shared stewardship are really identifying the areas in which we can do better for our service users, where we are acting in partnership. That's for two different perspectives. Firstly, from the recognising the financial landscape that we are currently in, how can we synergize resources in a way that amplifies the impact for our beneficiaries and for our funders, by working in partnership and collaboration more so than we do, without that fear, as you alluded to earlier, that if we share with others that we are going to lose opportunity, that we have to see collaboration as a positive enhancement of what we have to offer, and not as something which actually mitigates or stymies our ability to access funding. And I think the more that we take that really brave approach of saying, okay, what data have we got? What evidence have we got that can support collaborative funding opportunities? The better we're going to get as small third sector organisations in providing an enhanced service for our clients. The other aspect of it is recognising that not all of us can do everything. You know, where we really get to know our service users, we then are able to better signpost them either towards another organisation that can do something better than we would be able to, or in conjunction as part of a sort of a care package or a holistic approach to the various complex challenges and needs that particularly the women we're facing, we're working with face, but that would be similarly with families that you're working with or other sort of, you know, demographic groups. And so, you know, a good example of that is the work that we're doing currently with SPS, with other third sector organisations, with public sector organisations, looking at the through care which is provided for those who are liberated from custody units, and what do they need as a group and as individuals, and who are the stakeholders within that network that can provide aspects of that in a cohesive way, rather than that person feeling like they're being pulled from pillar to post in a really discombobulating time of their lives, where they've got 5 million different processes and organisations that they have to engage with in order to get the support and service that they need. So for us to be able to present it cohesively as a package in a way which is collaborated, considered, is a really important part of enhancing the level of service that each of us can individually give. So there's the sort of the finance aspect of it, the enhancing service aspect of it, and then I suppose the other advantage I see to this sort of way of working is the way that we, you know, ideally those with lived expertise and those with lived expertise experience would be the ones leading on these conversations, but we know that the practical reality, particularly from an employability point of view, is that they are quite often the voices which are excluded, which are marginalised, and which are not listened to. I am not suggesting that we represent the voices of those people. They have their own voices. So what we can then do is leverage opportunities for those voices to be heard. To start with, that might mean that we are replicating or repeating what has been said to us, but I hope that as the value of that lived expertise comes through, that those who are in those decision-making positions will start recognizing the benefit of hearing directly from those who have the experience that can contribute and should be contributing to recognizing what the barriers are to access and reducing them in a way that's accessible and appropriate for their particular circumstances. So that's something that I feel like we as third sector organisations really need to be pushing at, is recognising the value of that expertise, and enhancing the importance of it with those whom we are seeking to influence. And that's all.
So much, Louise. Brilliant example. And yeah, on so many fronts, the finance, the better outcomes, and also the voice and amplifying that across the system. Thank you for sharing. And Pegs, did you want to come in as well?
Well, I was just going to use kind of chair privilege, but I guess there was two things that have been rumbling around in my mind, and maybe they can flow into the next bit of what we talk about. But there's something about, like, from an employability perspective in Scotland, what if our local employability partnerships saw themselves as systems stewards rather than as the directors and, you know, kind of controllers of what gets kind of funded and delivered, and the performance management, having that performance management role. So I wonder what that would change, or, you know, how that might change things. And then there was also something sort of, when Elsa was talking about the collaboration, and I think actually across the piece, everything everyone said, there's something in my mind about what that takes from us. You know, like what do we need to do differently? What do we need to let go of? What do we need to be able to rise above, maybe when we might want to feel defensive or feel protective or want to sing the trumpet? You know, like I think there's something really interesting about what looking at things this way might take. It does ask us to work a little bit differently, I think. Maybe some of us, we're doing that already, but anyway, so those are my thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was just thinking of one of the stewards I work with. She said, you know, being a steward involves being able to question yourself every single day. It's about recognizing you don't have the answers and having that humility to constantly be questioning, and also questioning your own power, your own legitimacy. Who am I to be playing this role? How do I enable others? Pegs, you've nicely led us into the next bit about what does it take to be a steward, and then what does this mean for employability. So I'll pick up again, but yeah, really welcome your input in a moment. So we've heard lots of examples of stewardship in action, the value it can play in supporting collaboration, helping us do better together. So Peg started touching on it there, and I think it was reflected in many people's comments. Stewardship isn't easy work. Often we are battling against entrenched, embedded ways of working that are about targets and competition and doing things in standardized ways and not putting the voice of the people we're there to support at the heart of our work. So, you know, often it sounds really nice. It's about trust, it's about relationships, but this is really hard work. And I think in the more recent work we've done with system stewards, we've heard and seen and felt like how much of a toll this takes on people. And I do think like peer support is so valuable in this, whether it's networks like this or more locally, of people coming together and just celebrating the successes, but also sharing the challenges and what support's needed along the way. But it's tough because you are often challenging dominant and embedded ways of working and thinking. It is about, like, so much of this is about how you show up differently. If you're, you know, you're willing to embrace discomfort, showing that you're okay not knowing all the answers. It requires both patience and persistence. You really need to kind of be like, right, I'm in this for the long haul. I know everyone's not going to agree with me straight away, but also some patience to meet people where they're at, to acknowledge the challenges everyone's under. And, you know, if some people aren't on board to start with, it's fine. Gary, one of the stewards I mentioned, I don't know if I love this analogy, but he talks about this work is like being a foot fungus. As the momentum grows, people get curious, it becomes infectious, so it spreads through infection. But yeah, you're not going to get everyone on board with you straight away, but how do you start with the willing and then get everyone else to be curious and see the benefits? It also involves curiosity, and it also involves self-reflection. Stewards don't always get it right. We need to be constantly thinking about what is our role in this context. Have I stepped in enough, or have I stepped in too much? Do I need to step back and enable others? Am I replicating some of the challenges I'm trying to get away from by hoarding power? How do I enable others? So so much of this is about constantly reflecting on yourself and your role, as well as supporting everyone else to do that too. And often this is a journey of personal change. We've all been, you know, whether it's our education and our working life, we've all been kind of incentivized to work in a certain way. So it is about us questioning ourselves and looking out for each other. And the quote from Layla I mentioned, stewardship requires us to change our minds every day. And I don't think I put this on a slide, but one thing I should have mentioned was, hopefully you've picked it up from the examples I've given and the examples from everyone in the room, but lots of different people can be stewards. So we've seen examples of third sector organisations, both really tiny local ones and slightly bigger local and regional ones, commissioners, public services more broadly. Loads of people can play the role of steward. What we think is really important is legitimacy. And often stewards are people who kind of bridge between the formal and the informal. So they're not the most senior leaders in the public sector normally. They're normally not a community member, but they're people who can both understand and talk the language of both the formal and informal and help to bridge across. So yeah, anyone can be a steward, and sometimes it's about an individual or an organisation, or sometimes it's a collective effort. There was so much in what you were saying, Louise, that felt like I really like. Stewardship is basically a set of behaviours, and it sounded like what you were working towards was like a set of shared ways of working across lots of different partners. Although sometimes it does take one or two people to really model and push and support this way of working. So these are some emergent principles we're working on. You're the first person to see people to see them. They're definitely not right, but we were trying to think about, like, you can say what system stewards do, but so much of it is in the how and the behaviours. So we were trying to kind of capture some of the insights we've got from this work. So part of the role of steward is helping everyone in the system understand it better and connect. You can't underestimate the value of time spent together, learning and understanding. As the steward, you need to keep returning to core purpose and positive outcomes. And it's about serving the outcomes of the system, not your own needs and not the needs of individual organisations. It requires really putting your ego and your organisation's ego to one side. Never miss an opportunity to surface insight. Follow your curiosity. I've probably said it a few times, but don't be afraid to not know the answer. Actually, being in a room, having some power and saying you don't know the answer can often be one of the most powerful things for enabling better ways of working. And when people are certain this is definitely the right approach, we should do this because we've always done it, that's the time actually when you can probably see that things need to change. Be patient, play the long game and bring people with you. But as I said before, don't worry if not everyone's with you, because they're just not going to be. Be a human being, act with honesty and authenticity. Get out and meet people. It is all about relationships. Model the behaviours as I've said. What are those things that you're not seeing that you think are needed? If you start behaving in a certain way, often others will follow. Don't be afraid to cross traditional boundaries, break open traditional silos. And sometimes you do need to break the rules a bit, or at least perceived rules. Sometimes they're not real. But yeah, don't be afraid to challenge. Continually look to redistribute power and resources. Keep asking who's not in the room, what perspectives are missing, where resource might need to shift within the system. Balance ambition with pragmatism. Like, this work is about being really, really ambitious, but recognizing that it's going to take time. Not everything's going to be perfect. We need to celebrate those small wins along the way. And so much of our conversation with stewards has been about hope. Part of the role of steward is about, bringing hope that things can be better and that we can make that change. But you still need to make that sense for anger and despair sometimes. It's not about quashing that, but it's about trying to bring hope alongside that. And don't see yourself as indispensable. Know when to step back. Recognise the emotional toil of the work. It's not all about you, and actually success for a steward is probably spreading these behaviours, these ways of working more widely, and potentially you becoming redundant at the end of it. So yeah, don't see yourself as indispensable. I guess the word steward indicates that you're stewarding on behalf of others. It's not about centering yourself, it's about enabling others and supporting the system to become healthier, not just to sustain your role. I'm just quickly looking at the chat. Yeah, open to have been wrong. And once you admit openly that you've been wrong, it becomes far more easier to keep admitting it and make it part of the normal practice. And yeah, I think so much of good, whether it's youth work or so many other frontline roles, this is at the core of the practice, being able to connect people, to bridge across organisations and different people, putting people's voice at the heart of it, listening, being curious, yeah. And yeah, stewardship exists at every layer of the system. So you can be almost a steward to support an individual. You could be a steward to support a local collaboration. You can be a steward at a national level to think about how do we make the system work better across Scotland. Yeah, that's a really good point, Louis. We often spend time describing what we do, but not the outcomes we're all working towards. How can we shift that conversation to what are we ultimately working towards? What are we trying to do together? So thanks everyone for all of those comments. So I think we've touched on this a little bit, but before we move into what does this mean for employability, yeah, just wanted to kind of hear anyone else's experiences of working in this way, both what works, but also what feels challenging. Anyone like to share any experiences?
Again, I can dive in while people think, but I think two of the things that I've definitely found challenging, specifically around employability, is obviously the numbers game, because it's a culture that has been so ingrained that even when you say to an organization, we're working differently, frontline staff and managers have been struggle to trust that, you know, that is honest and that is what's going to happen. And so behavior can still sort of get pinged back towards focusing on the numbers and the numbers game. And then there's something else about colleagues within the public sector have been stuck in such a performance management culture up the food chain all the way to chief execs that they are not supported to talk about things that aren't working or take a continuous improvement approach. And it can feel very literally physically scary, I think, sometimes for people, even quite senior people, to try and step into that space and say, no, we're going to do this differently, you know, if you're a lone voice in that system. So I think for me, those are two really, really difficult challenges that definitely are specific to us. I've just seen Louise, she's got to go. So yeah, I don't know if others have anything similar. Oh, Elsa's asked if there's scope for a learning exchange on this theme. Oh yes, Elsa, I'm sure we can do something around that. So yes, well, let's have a chat about that. Mm-hmm.
Any other reflections? What does it feel like working in this way?
Yeah, so I popped in the chat there that it strikes me that good youth workers, I run a youth work organisation, Scran Academy. We support young people using food and cooking. So we provide an environment where they can build skills and go into work, but we also do a lot of the whole family work, wider support, holistic work to try and alleviate some of the wider barriers, which that's kind of where it's like we plug in plans and capacity into our systems and skills building, and then actually the capacity is drawn out by the complexity of the wider support needed. So as you've been talking, I've been like, wow, yeah, all of my team are system stewards, and they're navigating really complex systems kind of alone sometimes, and knowing that really that, you know, they can make 10 steps forward, but then 30 steps can be taken back without any sort of sense. So it's encouraging to hear people like Peg, I mean, talking about what would it look like if every public sector authority employability program, had a system stewardship approach, because I think that you know, would instill hope in my workforce for sure, and also in our service users and the young people that we support, because it's the, you know, where we see bad systems is where we need to make allowances and circumvent, and, you know, make sure that someone who we've got a college placement with, that they're supported by the college to turn up on time as well, and it's not just us. And, you know, so I think I see really good practice within small organizations and collaboratively across small organizations, you know, and I'm not just talking about employability here, because we work in the education sort of landscape as well. But coming to public sector, and that's where you get really ingrained systems, isn't it? That's where a lot of the challenges we face, they're the brick walls that we run up against, or the things that move really sluggishly when we need them to be slick. You know, so I guess they're my main reflections, is like, how do we, and I think Louise, or it wasn't Louise, was it? But she was talking about a lot of that as well, is like how to upscale this and send it up, because it's in some ways it's the way organizations like mine, you know, small to medium voluntary sector organizations, it's the way we work, because we have to, you know, I wrote down the nexus between intentionality and intuition. That's our landscape. That's where we are at. Yeah, I think it's incredibly resonant, all this, and it's very good to hear a lot of a lot of deep thinking around it. But it'd be fantastic to see practice, and it's very good to hear what Vicky was saying about Fife, and I might be in touch with you, Vicky. Yeah, so they're my reflections on it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Will. That's really helpful. And yeah, your team sound amazing. If they're doing this stuff day in, day out, it must be so tough. But I guess, yeah, we know it creates better outcomes. And yeah, I mean, it's harder to do this in the public sector because there are so many more rules, regulations, that the new public management systems are so much tighter. But I think in my experience, it is the frustrations that we feel in the third sector are often the same. Many of the same ones felt in the public sector. So how do you find those people who are frustrated but willing, get them involved and kind of spiral from there? How do you just get people in the room who are a bit curious or a bit frustrated and spark a different conversation there? Vicky, did you want to come in?
It was just to say I attended the Slade conference last year, and I was presenting on what we do as a LEP and how good our LEP is, and some of the stuff I think I was looked at like I had 3 heads or stuff like that. It was just like how because what we do is we commission all our work, so we don't ring fence the local authority. Everyone gets marked the exact same to see the need for it and things like that. So a lot of local authorities don't do that. So we done I think Adam Dunkley had done a report, and it said about working closely with third sector. So third sector is a big part in Fife's landscape of employability and a very important partner as well within the landscape. And it's trying to get partners who are good at one thing and good at another, you know what I mean? They all have their expertise, and third sector is a big part. But yeah, I think we do it different and proud to do it different, but we're always pushing to improve it as well and listening how we can improve it.
Thanks, Vicky. And I guess the fact that you are doing this, the more you can share it, the better, because it shows it's possible for others.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I attend the Slade meetings it's just been moved to a month now, and I always say to my training providers, I'm only as good as the information that you give me. If there's problems on the floor, please tell me that, because that's how we put that up. So yeah, it's really important.
Thanks, Vicky. So in the final bit of the session, I wanted to move us on to something Peg has already touched on. So what is the potential of a stewardship approach in employability? We've talked on different bits of it. Peg's brought the idea of what if local employment partnerships saw themselves as stewards. So yeah, I'd love to hear kind of, has anything sparked your interest, and what is the potential of this approach, particularly in employability? It might be at the national level, it might be at the local level, it might be in the voluntary sector, it might be spanning across the public sector. But yeah, really welcome any thoughts on what's the potential? Where could we take this?
I'm deliberately trying not to speak. Will, you got there, go for it.
I mean, my thought, and Vicky's touched on this, I'll talk about it quite a lot actually, but a system or employability services that are properly designed and driven by the people for whom they serve. You know, no more talk of pipelines and stages, and employability as a word as well. We don't say educatability. I don't like the word employability. I think it puts the onus, and anyway, that's a tangent, and it's a personal thing. But having a sense of, for, you know, the young people that we work with, really understanding, and living with them, what is going to make what the fundamentals are that are going to make the difference for them to be able to access. I think proper systems approach, proper systems steward approach would be able to design properly, co-design, because that in itself, just doing that is a huge task. You know, it takes a lot of preparatory work, and you know, we do a lot of co-design in our courses, and they take years to do. So thinking about something that interacts with all of the sectors as employability does, you know, that's quite a big bit of potential from my perspective.
Thanks, Will. And I realise you say you're a small youth organisation. Have you got a sense of this is a potential, like how might we get started on it? Are there opportunities locally for you to maybe nudge some of this to try different things?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got partnerships with, we've got quite a strong partnership with the employability strategy in NHS Lothian, and with a number of small organizations like, you know, caterers, cafes, you know, that young people who are working with us go and do placements with them. So using this to really think about how best to integrate our services together, and work in a much more systemic approach. Yeah. So on a small scale for what we do, yeah, I can think of immediate learnings that I can take out of this way of thinking and approach. But like I said before, really, I feel like we do a lot of it already because it's necessary to navigate the lives of the young people we work for. So working upwards and thinking about, I mean, funding, you know, our employability program is actually funded by the Lottery Foundation, and we put quite a lot of flexibility into our bid. And a lot of, you know, we started off with a pipeline 3.5 years ago. We started off with, you know, we're going to do a sort of Prince's Trust model, or, you know, and it'll be light touch, and it just fell flat straight away. So we changed iteratively, and we talked to the funders about it, and we now work on a much more flexible, every cohort's different, every cohorts are really small. The group work is very reflexive and very co-designed, and it seems to be pretty impactful. We've only been running it this way, actually. Yeah, officially we've only been running it this way since September, so we're early stages of a proper evaluation, but it seems to be really, really good. I'm very proud to say thank you. But it's yeah, so talking to local authority is a slightly different kettle of fish, and managing and trying to encourage that system upward is something that we haven't really ventured into as yet. So I'd be really interested to see talk to some of the other people on the call offline. So yeah, I'll be asking Jayne for some email addresses.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's so much potential in the, keep calling it a room on the Zoom call, to bring your evidence, your insights, your examples together, influence collectively, and maybe just host something and invite a few commissioners or other public sector colleagues along. Like, some of them will be curious, and hopefully it'll spark something different. Fiona, did you want to come in? I saw your hand up earlier.
Oops, yeah, I was going to say I work for a local authority, employability, and it's been quite interesting to hear. And I was debating, because I don't want to say this is, because it's like we've always done it like this. I would say our staff group are very good at stewarding. We don't look at people on a pipeline, we look at people as an individual. We have a holistic, person-centred approach. It's not about you're at stage 1 or you're at stage 5, and a lot of our stuff's pre-pipeline, and we're actually just last week had a meeting with the family support organisations, because we've recognised that even the pre-pipeline stuff is at a level that some of the families that they're working with are unable to access. So we are actually now co-designing via them because they're the trusted professional. And we recognise that us going in to ask people questions, that's not going to work. So the family support organisations, so not all local authorities are, we are performance driven because that's how we get our funding. That's Scottish Government determines we have to do what we have to do. But I would say our staff group are exceptionally talented and at actually working with people in a person-centred, holistic manner. And we do commission provisioning, all our stuff is commissioned out. We don't deliver anything, everything's commissioned out. And it is about co-design, and it is about, well, this isn't working, so what do we do next? Now, I work on the child poverty contract, so that especially working with schools, working with individuals, working with the family support organisations, it's not about what we think, because what we think just means that parents didn't sign up. So I'm kind of waving the flag here for local authority employability partnerships, because I think there is a lot of very excellent work goes on, and I hear you, Will, you're probably in a different local authority from ours, and if you're not, I'd love to have a chat with you. If you're in the Falkirk area, let's get together and I can change your mind. So I'm just putting it out there that there is a lot of good stewardship goes on. Now, we have a number of contracts, so we're able to actually hide the wire in with some of the funding. And that we're maybe in a good position that, you know, we're not just No One Left Behind funded. We have Fair Start, we have modern apprenticeships, we have UK Shares Respect, a whole lot of stuff. So people are supported, and we don't have that, well, you can't do that because there's no funding to support that. We hide the wiring about the funding behind that because it's a person's journey. And where we get the funding to do that, we worry about that in the background and support the individual. Well, which local authority are you? Are you anywhere near Falkirk?
Edinburgh.
Right. Okay.
Edinburgh, and I actually don't mean to besmirch them.
No. It's just I hear what you're saying, and I understand it, because not all local authorities are in the position that we're in with the contracts that we have, the Falkirk Council funding, and all the various funding pots that we have. So we can do that person-centred approach because we are hiding the wiring, and no all local authorities are in that position. So I get that, but we are, and we're lucky.
Thanks, Fiona. And yeah, there's good practice everywhere. And what strikes me from this call is the amount of brilliant practice across all of you, and how powerful that could be if you bring it together and say, actually, here's a different vision for the employability ecosystem. This is all of our roles in it as providers, as commissioners. How do we imagine it as national government agencies? How do we imagine it, all of this together? Probably need to start wrapping up soon, but Pegs, did you want to say anything more about your local employability partnerships idea before we...
Yeah, you know, and thanks, Fiona, as well, because I'm really glad that you said that, and because I think that's the reality. And there are some amazing things. I tried to pop in the chat as well, some of the areas that are really explicitly trying to take a systems stewardship approach to what they're doing in terms of the LEP and the commissioning, and how they're kind of engaging with partners and collaborating. And there really is some fantastic work happening, and there's some amazing delivery. So working on the front line in terms of those relationships, as well as I do always think that there's more that we can do. It doesn't matter how brilliant our area is or how good we think things are. That, I guess, that's the systems stewardship mindset in my head, is like, okay, so things are going well, this is working well, so it would be even better if, like, what would be the next step for us to move forward to get this working even better? Catherine's popped something in the chat about the measurement tools, and I do think, and Fiona, you mentioned about the kind of the performance management. I do think there is something about what we measure matters, and sometimes we measure what's easy to measure rather than what matters, and then that can end up driving it can end up driving certain behaviors, but it means that people that are trying to work in a person-centered way are not being supported by the system to do that. They're having to do that despite the system rather than because of it, which is a really different...
Sorry to interrupt you. I would agree. It's very hard to measure distance travelled, and especially with the child poverty contract, that is so, I don't mean so much more important than people getting a job. Obviously, it's everything. All the outcomes are important. But especially for people who are so far removed from the labour market, their distance travelled even to come to a pre-pipeline programme can be phenomenal. And then they're on a journey. The journey can take years because of the barriers that have to be overcome and the support that's required. So yeah, it's very difficult to, we can put the narrative in the reports, but there's no way to measure that in the reports for the funding.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there's something that we need to think about in terms of our national understanding of how we value and what we measure. There's something about what LEPs can look at and how we can look at what's happening in our local areas and maybe think differently about what we measure, but also about how we work together. And then as organizations, maybe just trying to continually take that continuous improvement mindset to the data as much as possible. I think those are some things that I kind of have in my mind, and just the ability to challenge and say, I know you think it's great, but actually where we sit, it's not so great, and not have that end up in a kind of a tension, but actually have that as a generative conversation. All right, really? Gosh, I never knew it looked like that on your side. Let's have a chat about that. So yeah, so those are some really kind of thoughts from my side. I think it's been great. It's so wonderful to see so many people here passionate about, engaged and inspired by thinking about trying to kind of grow this way of working in the landscape of employability. You know, as some of us have said, some of us have been just doing it naturally, but this idea of intentionality, I think that Dawn was talking about, that's maybe a different, that maybe is the next step, is actually, okay, well, how do we make this more, actually, no, we're really doing this, not just we happen to be doing it because of the kind of people we are and because of our understanding of how it all works. So Dawn, I don't know if you've got some final words. I'll hand back to you, and then we've got, hopefully, Jayne, I might need you to share the slide, or I might need to share the slide, the forthcoming webinars, which we want to encourage everybody to come to. So.
Brilliant. So just for me to really say a huge thank you to everyone. That I've loved hearing all the examples, all the engagement, and I'm struck by the potential. I think, yeah, Pegs, it's about intentionality in our own practice, but also, yeah, huge potential as a group, as a network, to explore some of this together. Like, what does a healthy system for employability look like? What are the things we need to invest in beyond service delivery? What are each of our roles in trying to nurture and support that? How do we support each other as we test out different ways of working and have some of those honest conversations about what's working and what's not? So thanks so much, everyone, for all your questions, reflections, examples, and good luck with progressing this practice. Pegs, I'd love to keep in touch and hear how the conversation develops. So the few final things from me, I can ping these slides to Pegs and she can share them around. We've got an event on the 12th of February where you can hear from some system stewardship. Now I can't say the word. You will get to hear from some system stewards doing this work in practice. So there'll be examples, tips and tools. So if you're interested, I've popped a link in here. We've got a resource on system stewardship, which is a few years old, but after this event, we'll be updating it with some more examples. So feel free to take a look and we'll be updating that soon. And I've talked about human learning systems a lot. At this link, there's nearly 100, I think, case studies of this way of working, including one from Pegs, from No One Left Behind in Fife. So if of interest, get in touch and you'd be really welcome to write a case study. The more we can surface examples of this kind of practice, the more we can influence. So thank you so much, everyone. And Pegs, I'll hand back to you to.
Yeah, I think maybe if you click onto the next slide, maybe is there another one after that or not? I can't remember. Yay! So we'll send these slides out and the booking links will be live. But just to say, we've got a big event at the gathering, working for Scotland. We'll have Claire Renton, the DG, Deputy Director of Employability Division in Scotland, Alexis Campbell from COSLA, and Rini from Find Futures, who works with Elsa Brown, who's on the call, and Chris Burt from Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So great opportunity to put all your difficult questions to them, talk about system stewardship, and then something around service design, human trafficking, which everybody's going to think they don't need to know about, but I'm telling you, you do. So get yourselves along. It's relevant to employability across Scotland, I'm sad to say. And finally, one about the outcome star. So those are all there for you to help grow this way of working. You know where I am. I'll put my email address in the chat as well. And also we've got recordings of previous sessions, which I need to pop in the chat, around commissioning with communities, commissioning and complexity, you know, all connected basically to these same topics and issues. And you can just watch the recordings back at your leisure, and highly recommend them to anybody who is interested in this way of working. So huge thank you, I think, to Jayne as our Social Enterprise Scotland host. Thank you, Jayne, for doing all the admin and everything and making this all work and getting her internet up and running again. And to you, Dawn, for taking us through that really insightful kind of look at how system stewardship works, what matters, and helping us all think a little bit more about what that might mean for us in the land of employability. So yeah, I think that's it. We can maybe let everyone get on with the rest of their day. So thank you very much.